You have probably done this 100 times without thinking twice. Last night's rice goes into a container, into the fridge, and tomorrow it comes back out, gets a minute in the microwave, and you eat it at your desk. It feels completely normal. It feels safe. And most of the time, it is. But there is one specific leftover in that routine that food safety researchers have been quietly warning about for years, and almost nobody outside food science circles knows the details. It is not about calories. It is not about nutrients disappearing. It is about something that can survive the reheating process entirely, sitting inside your food even after it comes out of the microwave steaming hot. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly which foods deserve real caution when reheated, which popular fears are overblown, and what you can actually do, starting tonight, to make your leftovers genuinely safer. No fear-mongering, no miracle fixes. Just what the research actually shows. Let's start with the one that surprises people the most: rice. Why rice is different from almost every other leftover. Here is something most people don't know. Raw rice, even the bag sitting in your pantry right now, can carry the spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. This isn't contamination from bad handling. It's naturally present in the environment and ends up on grains before they're even cooked. Under normal conditions, this isn't a problem. Cooking kills the active bacteria. The issue starts after cooking, not during it. Bacterial spores are tough. Some of them survive the boiling process because spores are built to withstand heat that would kill an ordinary bacterial cell. Once the rice cools down to room temperature, and especially if it sits out for an extended period, those surviving spores can wake up and start multiplying. As they multiply, some strains produce a toxin. Here's the part that catches people off guard. This toxin is heat stable. That means when you reheat the rice the next day, you're killing bacteria, but you're not necessarily destroying the toxin they already released. Reheating rice thoroughly does not undo damage that happened while it was sitting out. This is a well-established food safety issue. It's recognized by food safety agencies worldwide, and it's the reason behind a piece of advice you've probably heard before without fully understanding why. Don't leave cooked rice at room temperature for more than about 2 hours. The fix here isn't complicated, and it doesn't mean giving up leftover rice. It means changing how you handle the window between cooking and refrigerating. Spread rice out on a wide plate or shallow container right after cooking instead of piling it into a deep pot. This lets it cool faster. Get it into the fridge within an hour or two, rather than letting it sit on the counter through dinner and cleanup. And when you do reheat it, only reheat what you're about to eat, rather than reheating and recooling the same batch multiple times over several days. That's rice. Straightforward risk, straightforward fix. But the next 3 foods on this list are more complicated because the science around them is often exaggerated in one direction online and dismissed too quickly in the other. I want to walk you through what's actually solid and what isn't. The chicken question. What's real and what's overstated? If you search, "Is reheating chicken bad for you?" you'll find claims ranging from totally fine to silently giving you cancer. Neither extreme is accurate, and the confusion mostly comes from mixing up 2 very different things: food poisoning risk and long-term chemical exposure. Let's separate them. The food poisoning risk is simple and well understood. Chicken needs to be reheated to an internal temperature of 165 °C. It's InspiringVitality to kill any bacteria like Salmonella that may have grown during storage. If you reheat chicken properly and eat it promptly, this risk is effectively eliminated. This isn't controversial. It's basic food safety. The second issue is more nuanced, and it's where a lot of online content gets things wrong by oversimplifying decades of nutrition research into scary sound bites. When any protein-rich food, not just chicken, but red meat, fish, and poultry, generally is cooked at high heat, especially grilling, pan-searing, or broiling, a group of compounds called heterocyclic amines can form. These compounds have been studied extensively because in laboratory and animal studies, at high doses, some of them show mutagenic activity. Here's what tends to get left out of the scary headlines. The amount that forms depends heavily on cooking method and temperature, not simply on whether food is reheated once. Boiling, steaming, or gentle reheating produces far less of these compounds than repeated high-heat searing or char grilling. And critically, the human studies on this subject are observational. They look at people's reported eating habits over years and find associations with very high, frequent consumption of heavily charred or well-done meat, not with reheating a normal portion of chicken in a microwave once or twice. So the honest takeaway isn't reheated chicken causes cancer. It's something much more measured, minimizing repeated high-heat charring of meat. And using gentler reheating methods, like a covered pan on low heat or low oven, is a reasonable habit, not because one reheated chicken breast is dangerous, but because it's a small, easy adjustment that adds up favorably over a lifetime of meals. I'll give you the practical version of this in a moment, but first, there's a vegetable that gets far less attention in this conversation, and it genuinely deserves more of your attention than chicken does. The overlooked case of leafy greens, spinach, and vegetables like it, beet greens, celery, Swiss chard, are naturally rich in nitrates. This is normally framed as a good thing, and largely it is. Dietary nitrates from vegetables are linked to healthy blood vessel function, and there's genuinely encouraging research on this front. The complication is a storage issue, not a cooking issue. Once these vegetables are cooked and then left sitting particularly at room temperature, but even in the fridge over a couple of days, naturally occurring bacteria on the plant surface can convert some of those nitrates into nitrites. On their own, nitrites aren't automatically dangerous either. The concern arises specifically when nitrites are exposed to certain amino acids under high heat, which can lead to the formation of nitrosamines compounds that are genuinely classified by international health bodies as carcinogenic based on strong evidence in the context of things like processed, cured meats. The nitrate to nitrite to nitrosamine pathway in vegetables is real chemistry, and it's exactly why food safety guidance in several countries specifically advises against repeatedly reheating cooked leafy greens, particularly for infants and young children who are more sensitive to nitrite exposure. But, and this matters, the practical risk from an adult eating spinach that was cooked, refrigerated overnight, and reheated once is very different from the risk profile of, say, daily processed deli meat. Context and dose make a real difference here, and I'll walk through exactly where the line is when we get to the practical guidelines. For now, here's the open question I want you thinking about as we move into part 2. Out of everything discussed so far, the food most people consider completely safe to prep in bulk and eat all week because it seems almost impossible to get wrong is actually the one where the chemistry gets the most interesting. And it isn't a vegetable, a grain, or a piece of meat. It's something sitting in almost every fridge in the world, usually boiled or scrambled in bulk on a Sunday. We'll get into exactly why in the next part, along with the specific temperature and storage rules that actually matter, the ones based on real food chemistry, rather than the exaggerated versions you'll find in a lot of viral health content. Eggs. If you meal prep this week, there's a good chance a batch of hard-boiled or scrambled eggs is sitting in your fridge right now, ready to be reheated for breakfast tomorrow. Eggs have earned a reputation as one of the safest, most reliable foods you can prep in bulk. And nutritionally, that reputation is well-deserved. They're a complete protein source, they contain choline for brain health, and they pack in nutrients like selenium and lutein that are hard to get elsewhere in one food. So why bring eggs into a conversation about reheating at all? Because eggs illustrate something important about food chemistry that most of the conversation around reheating danger completely misses. It's not really about reheating itself. It's about oxidation. And oxidation is a process that starts the moment food is first cooked. Reheating just continues it. What actually happens to egg yolks when they're cooked and cooled? The yolk is where nearly all of an egg's fat and cholesterol live. When you cook an egg the first time, that fat is exposed to heat and oxygen, and a small amount of oxidation naturally occurs. This is completely normal and happens with virtually any fat-containing food you cook. It's not unique to eggs, and it's not inherently dangerous at the level that occurs during normal cooking. The relevant chemistry shows up with a specific group of compounds called oxysterols, essentially oxidized forms of cholesterol. Researchers have studied oxysterols because, in laboratory settings, some of them show pro-inflammatory and cell-damaging properties. This research is real, and it's been published in nutrition and food science journals for years. Here's where the nuance matters, though, and where a lot of alarming content skips a crucial detail. Oxysterol formation is dose and temperature dependent, and it scales with how much the fat is repeatedly exposed to high heat and oxygen, not with the simple act of warming up an egg once. A single reheating of a boiled egg in a low oven or a brief microwave burst is a very different chemical event than, say, deep frying eggs repeatedly or holding egg dishes at high heat for extended periods, like on a steam table for hours. In other words, this is a how problem more than a whether problem. The method and intensity of reheating matters far more than whether you reheat at all. The protein side of the story. There's a second separate issue with reheated eggs that's less about long-term chemistry and more about texture and digestibility. But it's worth understanding because it's often lumped in with the scarier claims. Egg proteins denature, meaning they unfold and change structure the first time they're cooked. That's actually what turns a runny egg into a solid one. When you reheat egg dishes, especially in a microwave where heat distribution is uneven, those proteins can denature further and form tighter, rubbery protein bonds. This is why reheated scrambled eggs often turn tough or rubbery. That's a real observable texture change, not a mysterious toxin forming. It's primarily a quality issue rather than a safety one, though a very tough, overcooked protein structure can be somewhat harder to digest for some people. So, to be direct about it, the biggest reason reheated eggs are unpleasant is texture, not toxicity. The oxidation concern is real chemistry, But it's a matter of degree, tied closely to cooking method and how many times the food goes through a heat cycle, not a reason to be afraid of your Sunday egg prep. Bringing the 4 foods together, what the actual pattern is. Now that we've gone through rice, chicken, leafy greens, and eggs, you might notice something. These 4 foods don't share one single danger. They share 3 different underlying mechanisms, and understanding which mechanism applies to which food is what actually lets you manage the risk intelligently, instead of just being generally anxious about your fridge. Mechanism 1 is bacterial toxin formation, and this is really only a major concern with rice because of how Bacillus cereus spores behave. This is a food handling timing issue, how fast you cool it and how long it sits out, not really a reheating chemistry issue at all. Mechanism 2 is protein and lipid oxidation under high repeated heat, which applies to both chicken and eggs, but at very different intensities depending on cooking method. High heat charring or grilling produces meaningfully more of these compounds than gentle reheating in a covered pan or low oven. Mechanism 3 is nitrate to nitrosamine conversion, which is specific to nitrate-rich vegetables like spinach and depends heavily on storage time before reheating, not on the vegetable being unsafe in general. None of these mechanisms mean these foods are dangerous to eat. All 4 are staples in diets associated with good long-term health outcomes. That's not a contradiction. What the research actually supports is something much less dramatic than these foods cause cancer. The method and frequency of reheating, and how long food sits between cooking and refrigeration, make a measurable difference in the compounds that form. Small, practical adjustments shift the odds in your favor over time. That's a very different message than the fear-based framing you'll see in a lot of viral content, but it's the one that's actually grounded in the evidence. Where a lot of health content gets this wrong, I want to pause here and be honest with you about something because I think it matters for how you evaluate health information in general, not just this topic. A lot of videos and articles on this subject take a real, well-studied compound, acrylamide, heterocyclic amines, nitrosamines, oxystrols, and present it in a way that implies eating a reheated meal is roughly equivalent to smoking or eating processed deli meat daily. That's a distortion. These compounds are studied because at high, repeated chronic exposure levels, the kind seen in industrial food processing, heavy grilling cultures, or specific occupational exposures, there's meaningful evidence of harm. That is genuinely different from the exposure level in someone eating a home-cooked meal that was reheated once or twice. This doesn't mean the underlying chemistry is fake. It's very real, and it's worth understanding. But understanding it should lead you toward practical, sustainable habits, not toward throwing out your leftovers in a panic or feeling guilty about your Sunday meal prep. That's really the difference between good health information and content designed mainly to scare you into watching until the end. The chemistry is genuinely interesting. The actual risk from typical home cooking and reheating is, for almost everyone, modest and very manageable with a few consistent habits. So let's get into exactly what those habits look like. The specific practical version of everything we've covered, food by food, plus a few reheating principles that apply across the board regardless of what you're warming up. That's coming up in the final part, along with the one question I think is actually more important than any individual food on this list: how you're storing your leftovers in the first place, since that turns out to matter more than almost anything else we've discussed so far. Let's bring everything together now with something you can actually use. Not vague warnings, but specific habits that make a real measurable difference. I'll go food by food, and then close with this storage principle that matters more than almost anything else we've talked about. Rice. The timing rule that actually matters. The single biggest factor with rice isn't reheating. It's how long the rice sits between being cooked and being refrigerated. Bacillus cereus spores need time at room temperature to multiply and release their toxin. So cutting down that window is the entire game. Practical steps. Once rice is done cooking, don't let it sit on the counter through a long dinner or while you clean up. Transfer it to a wide, shallow container fairly quickly so it cools faster than it would piled up in a deep pot. Surface area is your friend here. Get it into the fridge within roughly 1 to 2 hours of cooking. When you reheat it, reheat only the portion you're eating rather than reheating and recooling the same batch repeatedly over several days, and try to finish a batch within about 3 to 4 days. None of this requires you to give up rice, meal prepped or otherwise. It just means treating the cooling window as the important step, rather than assuming reheating alone makes everything fine again. Chicken and other meats, method matters more than frequency. For food safety, the rule is simple and non-negotiable. Reheat chicken and other meats to an internal temperature of 165 degrees, 74 degrees, verified with a food thermometer if you want to be precise, and eat it promptly afterward. That eliminates the bacterial risk entirely. For the oxidation and heterocyclic amine side of things, the goal isn't to avoid reheating. It's to avoid unnecessary, repeated high heat charring. A few habits that genuinely help. Reheat gently using a covered pan on medium-low heat, a low oven, or steaming, rather than blasting meat on high heat or repeatedly re-searing it. If you're eating leftover chicken cold in a salad or wrap, that sidesteps the reheating chemistry altogether and works well for things like grilled chicken breast prepped ahead of time. And when you're cooking meat fresh in the first place, especially grilling or pan searing, trimming visible char and avoiding cooking at very high heat for extended periods is a habit that matters more over the long run than how you handle leftovers. Leafy greens, the one that benefits most from a small habit change. This is the food where a genuinely useful, low-effort change makes the biggest difference. Because the nitrate to nitrite conversion in spinach and similar greens depends on storage time, the fix is mostly about timing rather than avoidance. If you can, cook leafy greens fresh and eat them the same day. This sidesteps the issue almost entirely. If you do have leftovers, the safest approach is to eat them cold, straight from the fridge, rather than reheating them, and to consume them within about 6 hours, rather than letting them sit for a full day or more before eating. This guidance matters more for infants and young children who are more sensitive to nitrite exposure, so it's worth being a bit more careful with cooked spinach or similar greens in baby food or toddler meals specifically. Many pediatric nutrition guidelines already reflect this. For most adults, eating a normal portion of reheated spinach occasionally, this isn't a reason for alarm. It's simply a case where eat leftovers cold instead of reheating is an easy swap that removes the concern almost completely. Eggs, cook fresh when you can and reheat gently when you can't. Eggs are a food worth continuing to eat regularly. They remain one of the most nutritionally complete foods available, and nothing in this discussion changes that. The practical adjustment is really about method. Where possible, eat eggs freshly cooked. If you're meal prepping hard-boiled eggs for the week, they actually hold up well. Storing them unpeeled in the fridge and eating them cold is a great option, since it avoids the reheating step altogether. If you do want to warm up an egg dish like a frittata or scrambled eggs, gentle heat works better than a high-powered microwave blast. A low oven, a covered pan on low heat, or even a brief warm water bath for something like a breakfast burrito all reheat food more evenly and reduce the harsher oxidation and rubbery texture that comes with high-intensity reheating. The habit that matters more than any single food. Here's the pattern that connects everything we've covered. In almost every case, the biggest risk factor wasn't the act of reheating itself. It was how food was handled in the window between the first cooking and the second heating. How quickly it cooled, how long it sat out, how many days it spent in the fridge before being eaten. So if you take away just one practical habit from this entire video, make it this. Cool your food quickly, refrigerate it promptly, and try to eat leftovers within a few days rather than stretching them out over a week. That single habit addresses the Bacillus cereus concern with rice, reduces the nitrate conversion issue with leafy greens, and it generally limits how much time any food spends in the temperature range where problems tend to develop. A few other habits worth adopting across the board. Use a food thermometer if you reheat meat or egg dishes regularly, since 165 degrees is the number that actually matters for safety, not guesswork. Favor gentler reheating methods, a covered pan, a low oven, or a short microwave, burst with stirring over blasting food on high heat, since uneven, intense heat tends to drive more of the oxidation reactions we've discussed. And genuinely, one of the most effective changes you can make has nothing to do with chemistry at all. Cook portions closer to what you'll actually eat, so you're simply generating fewer leftovers that need to sit around in the first place. Keeping this in perspective, I want to end where we more or less started. None of this is a reason to be afraid of your fridge. Rice, chicken, spinach, and eggs are staples of healthy eating patterns around the world. That doesn't change based on anything discussed here. What does change, hopefully, is how you handle the space between cooking and eating. A little faster on the cooling, a little more mindful about storage time, a little gentler with the reheating method when it matters. That's really the difference between headline-driven fear and useful, evidence-based food safety. The chemistry behind bacterial toxins, oxidation byproducts, and nitrosamine formation is real and well studied, but the actual risk to someone eating a normal, varied diet with reasonably careful storage habits is modest, and almost entirely within your control with small, sustainable adjustments, not dramatic lifestyle changes. If this kind of practical, evidence-based breakdown is useful to you, it helps a lot to hit like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It's genuinely the best way to support content like this and keep it coming. And if there's someone in your life who reheats leftovers on autopilot the way most of us do, sending this their way takes 10 seconds and might change a habit or two. No lecture required. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. I'll see you in the next video.